started. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Brooke Bacon, Marketing Lead with the GSI, and I'm very pleased to welcome our main presenter, Bill Rem, Senior Manager at GSI. Now, before we get started, I just want to give you a moment to review our Safe Harbor statement. Now, for a quick overview of our meeting today, we'll do some introductions and housekeeping. Then I will provide you with a brief company overview. And then I will turn it over to Bill to get into our main presentation. And then we will wrap up with a 10-minute question and answer session. So if you would like to submit a question, you can do so through your dashboard. On the panel, there is a little button that says Q&A. If you can click on that, or there's also going to be a chat button. If you put it in there, we'll be checking both areas. All questions will be answered at the end. So feel free as throughout the presentation to submit your questions though, as they come up. Now for just a brief company overview. Who is GSI? We are a full service ERP, SaaS, cloud, ITSM, cybersecurity reseller, as well as a consulting and managed services organization. Advanced AI and automation are used in all of our products and services to help our clients reduce TCO and increase ROI. We also have offices nationwide and partners worldwide, which allows us to offer a 24/7 global support model. And we are also the only partner in the industry that you will find that has a 100% guarantee, our signature guarantee on everything that we do. These are just some of our accreditations and certifications. Also, we have our innovative product offerings. We have Genius AI, Genesis Performance Optimizer, Rapid Reconciler, Gateway Now, and Genome. For a deeper dive into any of these, you can find them on our website, or we will also be sending out a copy of the presentation after today's webcast. And on our screen right now, you can see these are just some of our clients. And now I'd like to turn it over to Bill Rem to get into our main presentation.
All right, thank you. All right, you should be able to see my screen.
Yep, I can see it.
All right, so I'm going to be talking about a guide to CNC for non-technical people. This won't turn you into a CNC, but hopefully will demystify some of the things that are talked about. I currently have been with GSI for 11 years, and I am in charge of the database managed services, certified in Oracle, SQL Server, and multiple other databases. And now you're probably wondering, why am I teaching the CNC class? And it's because I've been a CNC since 1998, a long time. And I've also been a JD Edwards developer in the past. So what is CNC? And what is a CNC administrator? And how do I translate what the CNC is telling me into something that actually makes sense? Now, when you're talking about a CNC, we're talking about JD Edwards CNC, and that actually stands for something. This is not like the mechanical CNC milling. So let's go into that. What? Wrong way. What is CNC? Configurable Network Computing, or CNC, blah, 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 blah. Wait a minute. None of that makes sense. So let me give you a better definition, which is CNC is Configurable Network Computing. And that was a phrase that was coined a long time ago, 20 plus years ago. And it's the concept on which JD Edwards is built. And it's an engine that lets JD Edwards work on multiple hardware platforms like iSeries or, whatever manufacturer builds whatever server they have, Dell, Compaq, whatever. Multiple operating systems, Windows, Linux, Unix, and the iSeries. And all the major databases. And of course, there are some more major databases than just Oracle and SQL Server and DB2, but those are the primary ones that JD Edwards works on. Now you can have any combination and any number of these servers in a JD Edwards environment. And so if you want a SQL Server database for non-prod and an Oracle database for production, you can do it. Nobody's going to know except your CNC admin and the DBA, of course. So let's talk about architecture. So CNC, besides being the person managing your JD Edwards system, it's the technology that actually runs your system. And the minimum you need is a database, a Windows or Linux server to be your logic server, which is called the enterprise server, a web server, and a deployment server, and optionally separate server manager, which is a management tool for the system. This shows some of the other options. At the top, you can see there is a BSSV server, transaction server, BI publisher, and down at the bottom is the core of what makes up JD Edwards. It can get a lot more complicated than that, but that's the basics. From the perspective of CNC, what is the database? This is where all the data goes. If you have the application, you have to have a database. The application needs the database in order to do anything. And like I said before, you can have a mix or match of databases, although I recommend staying with one database. If you're migrating from JD Edwards, one of the cool things that JDE tools can do, it can migrate from any platform to any other platform that it supports. So you can migrate from iSeries to Oracle database if you want. And it's actually, speaking specifically about iSeries to Oracle, if you want to do that migration, there are other tools, third-party tools out there that say that they can do iSeries to whatever migrations. JD Edwards does exactly what all those tools do, and it's been able to do that for over 20 years. So if you're migrating from iSeries to anywhere, just use JD Edwards. It comes with the software. It's free. It's not an extra cost, and it does everything that any other third-party tool does. So your databases can be a single database. They can be clustered. They can be in the cloud. You could have a database on-prem and in the cloud. It doesn't matter where the database is. But one of the key things is that a CNC can't really maintain a database. You have to have a database administrator. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a DBA. It's also because I used to be a CNC, and CNCs just don't have that depth of knowledge needed for these modern databases. And I say modern, but it's really necessary to have a database administrator to do your in-depth administration. And I always have to point this out. You got to have a solid backup and recovery plan because your whole business depends on the data in that database. And that's I have a whole other webcast and a discussion about disaster recovery, high availability, and ransomware protection. Next time that comes up, y'all should watch it. But any kind of disaster recovery that is going to be required is going to be big coordination between the DBA and the CNC. Now, the other component that I talked about, this is key. JDE can't work without an enterprise server, and it's also called a logic server. Again, I mentioned the multiple platforms that can be on. You can mix Linux and Windows. The application doesn't really care. It runs kind of the same in both. But you have multiple. If you have different OS platforms, then you'll have to build. They have different package requirements. So your enterprise server has your path code information. It has executable objects. It's where most of the applications actually run, especially when you're running UBEs. The logic of JD Edwards runs on the enterprise server. A lot of applications these days are a little bit lighter, where they offload some of the, the heavy lifting to the database itself. But JD Edwards takes care of that on its own, for the most part. And as your organization grows, you can add more and more enterprise servers. You may have an enterprise server just for your interactive applications. You could have another one just to run UBEs. Some clients have one just for RF Smart or DSI, because the amount of activity coming in for those is so much, it tends to interfere with other things. Another primary component is the web server, and it's also called a JAS server. It goes on WebLogic or WebSphere. This can also be in multiple platforms, and this was where all your executable code goes. and everybody's web browser connects to the web server, or specifically to an HTML server on the web machine. You can connect to it with most browsers, Explorer, Edge, Firefox, mobile devices, and you can have multiple web servers. In fact, I highly recommend that if you are running JD Edwards, you need to have at least a production and a separate non-production server. And inside each one of those web servers, you can have multiple HTML servers, and those are what is actually serving the application up. So, for example, what we're trying to do is eliminate any single point of failure. So if you have two production web servers that each have two HTML servers inside of them, now you have some redundancy there. If one server goes down, you have one left. So if you're running a single box for your web server, then that's a single point of failure. It's very easy to spin up multiple web servers for JD Edwards. They're very light. And web servers are also the basis for orchestrators, AIS, BSSV, and and also they do their own load balancing inside of them too. So let's talk about business services, or BSSV. I mentioned that. This is for third-party integration. So anything outside of JD Edwards that needs to talk to JD Edwards, this is what this uses. And this uses SOAP instead of REST. And so don't worry about what that means. SOAP is just one way for two different applications to talk to each other. The more common one today is called REST, like the REST API. And to use BSSV, you have to have development skills. And it's really ideal for if you have a lot of stuff to integrate, or it's very complex or very busy. Massive amounts of integration is what you use BSSV for. And it is still in use. So Oracle's not going to deprecate this anytime soon. It has a niche, and it's very good at that part. And now we're going to talk about AIS, Application Interface Server. And this is a foundational component of Orchestrator. And this is installed just like a web server. It's just like installing it on in Server Manager. And this is JSON over REST. Don't worry about what that means. But this is to also communicate outside of JD Edwards. You can use this to control JD Edwards from another application to the APIs. This is ideal for, like I said, orchestration. And it's also good for Internet of Things, mobile devices, smaller types of integrations, smaller, faster integrations are going to use AIS rather than BSSV. Now, when you get AIS, you will get AIS if you install the Orchestrator Studio. So that comes with it, and it doesn't require. And this you have to have an AIS in order to have Orchestrator. So let's talk about what is Orchestrator. This is a way for JD Edwards users to easily automate otherwise manual business processes, and then integrate data from external sources like IoT devices, applications, and transform that data into something that works for you. So this is, they coined this term called citizen developers. Essentially, they're giving anybody the tool set to create something that looks good, that works for you specifically, or maybe someone will make something that works for a department. And the orchestrations help do things like eliminate errors in manual processes. Once you're automating that, then those variables kind of go away. And because you can integrate stuff from these other mobile and third-party applications, you don't have to have a lot of manual data entry now. The Orchestrator Studio this is the main screen here that you see there. This is what the quote-unquote citizen developers will use to make their own applications, or the modifications to the applications. There's another part of the citizen developer world, and that's called UX1. And this allows you to customize EnterpriseOne in the way that you see fit. So whereas Orchestrator was automating manual processes and things, UX1 is modifying how it looks, and maybe putting in embedding an application into an existing application. It used to be called E1 pages. So the UX1, this, like if you have a screen that kind of depends upon knowledge of another area, you can use UX1 to put in like a window to that page. But one thing I want to caution y'all to be careful with is if you are doing UX1 layouts, it's kind of easy to create a component that that can bring your system to your needs, because Orchestrator and Citizen Developer and UX1 allows people that aren't developers to do these things. There's an unfortunately common tendency for these new components to act outside of what would normally be best practice, like not using indexes or doing returning the full contents of the F0911. We had that happen at one client where they had a UX1 object that would select everything from the F0911 every time they went into this particular application. And of course, they said there's something wrong with the database and the temp DB is filling up and the database is crashing. And it took a little while to figure out that this, and everyone was saying, we are using this application. It doesn't have anything to do with F0911, but it was the UX1 panel that was doing the call, and it was doing a wide open select to that table. And then they were able to fix that and put some, additional filters on it so it didn't try to destroy the application. Now, and you see the picture, whoops, let me go back. My mouse wheel is very sensitive. On the bottom, this is the alert, analyze, act. That's part of this, I guess they call it a paradigm and how you develop these things. You want to, you can create alerts, you can use you can create analytics to look at those alerts. And then the action is, what are you gonna do with that information? And there's already a whole bunch of out-of-box components delivered, composite pages, E1 pages, queries, watch lists, Cafe One, grid formats, UDOs. Those all fall under the umbrella of UX1. All right, let's talk about deployment server. The deployment server is probably one of the most important parts of your JD Edwards application. It's where all of your original code is. Anytime you're going to do any patches, apply an ESU, do an upgrade, any modification to any object in JD Edwards, all goes to the deployment server. And on the deployment server, there's an Oracle Enterprise Edition database, which is a metadata only database, a special license granted by Oracle to hold all of the JD Edwards metadata. And that database, in conjunction with the deployment server, application on the deployment server, is what's used to manage all that stuff. You also build you can build all of your packages to deploy to the rest of the system here. It's a typical place for Server Manager to be installed, although that can be on a separate server. And it is a Windows only. I think they may have moved that to Linux by now, but it is, I haven't personally seen one yet. All right. So what is Server Manager? We mentioned that before. This is a tool used by CNC Administrator, and it tracks everything that's going on as it relates to JD Edwards. You can also install all kinds of all the different web components, like the web server itself, the HTML servers, AIS, Orchestrator instances, and it's all managed through here. It's a central repository for all of JD Edwards logging. So if any of you are familiar with JD Edwards at all, you know that the enterprise server and the web servers, so that like the WebLogic server and the HTML instances underneath of that, they all have just tons and tons of logs. And before Server Manager, you had to go to each individual server to see that. Now you can see all of those logs through Server Manager. And not only can you see the regular logs that have always been there, JDE and JD debug logs, you can set up user specific logs. You can turn on and off debug logging for logic server kernels through here. And you can turn on and off the servers. And this is the preferred way to start and stop instances is through Server Manager. And this is just one particular screen that you can see. There's so much to talk about Server Manager. I actually did a whole other webcast on how Server Manager works, but you can get down into the nitty-gritty of exactly what users are signed on to a specific web instance and see all the applications that they have open at that time, and even see all the calls to the database that they're doing with their specific user. It's a very powerful tool, and JD Edwards will work without this. You don't actually need Server Manager for JD Edwards to function, but if you aren't using it, then you're depriving yourself of some excellent tools. All right, what is a tools release update? The tools release or an update. Let me just take a step back. So until recently, everything was in the technical upgrades and updates to JD Edwards were done in the context of a tools release, and those were released every 6 to 12 months. And now they're doing updates, which are sent out annually. So a tools release affects only the technology part of the application. So it's only the technology part. The application, how your financials work, and how the calculations are made, and things that they're specific to whatever business activity you're doing, that is part of the application. Tools releases don't affect that. They do the everything underneath. How does the web server communicate with the database, for example, or performance issues, memory leaks? That's the kind of stuff that it fixes. It's all the stuff in the background. Now, tools release can also affect how the application looks, because the tools release covers the graphical interface, the web technologies, and all that. So when you do a tools release, it's not going to affect how your business functions, but it could affect how you use the application. So right now, I think the newest update is update 22 for 9.2, and a lot of cool stuff coming out there. I won't go into too much detail about this, but there's other webcasts that talk about tools release / updates. Now, there's a concept with tools release specifically called multi-foundation. And this is when, a tools release is the basis for how your entire application functions. But if you want to upgrade your tools release to a new level or a new update, you may not want to just throw that right into production, especially if it makes major changes to the UI. You want to be able to test it out. But the way JD Edwards is built by default is that every part of JD Edwards uses the same foundation and the same tools release. And what you can do then is you create multi-foundation. You're essentially creating another instance on another server or on the same server that allows you to run two separate foundations. Because there's only one deployment server, you'll have multiple tools release levels installed on that same deployment server. And that allows you to build and test objects in the old tools release to make sure that production still functions correctly. But for the development part, and PY, DV, and PY, you can build it in the new tools release and test out that functionality without affecting production. Nowadays, best practice for JD Edwards is to have a separate non-prod logic server and database from production. So multi-foundation sometimes is not as complicated as it used to be, but because deployment server is still single foundation by default, you'll have to accommodate that. And it's a little complicated, but whenever somebody says multi-foundation, that just means you have the ability to run two separate tools releases. All right, let's talk a little about middleware. You don't really hear much about middleware, but you do have to understand that it does exist. And the middleware is what really is the core of CNC. It allows these different components to communicate with each other without having to do anything special. It's a totally in-house, custom built thing by JD Edwards or by Oracle. And it has two parts. One is JDE Net, which is the network part, and then JDE Base, which allows it to communicate to any database. So when you have your fat clients and web clients and web servers communicating with a logic server, the JDEnet is the part that allows you to have multiple kinds of logic servers and web servers. So the JDEnet takes care of translating between Windows and Linux and iSeries, as necessary, so that you don't have to do any kind of weird work to make that happen. JDE Base is the same way. JD Edwards database interaction is done at a very generic level, and JDE Base does the translation between, say, Oracle and SQL Server, or iSeries and SQL, or something like that. And those are the key parts of what makes JD Edwards so flexible. All right, well, we've talked about CNC. Now we're going to talk about CNC administrator. And when anybody says, "Are you a CNC? Are you a JD CNC?" This is what this means: is they are just a JD sysadmin. And there are three major types of JDE application experts, and that's the CNC, JD developer, and a functional person like a business analyst or an application user. A database administrator I didn't put that in here on purpose because really any database administrator could manage a JD Edwards, a database running a JD Edwards application. There are a lot of really specific things about how JDE works with a database. So if you are going to hire a database administrator to manage your JD Edwards system, you want one that knows JD Edwards, but it's not technically necessary. However, CNCs are usually highly paid, right? All of you CNCs out there say yes. And they're highly technical. JD Edwards is really complicated and has a lot of odd ways that it does stuff and a lot of interconnections that are not intuitive. So CNCs have to really know their stuff. I did mention at the bottom, CNCs are not database administrators. Like I said, I used to be a CNC and I thought I was a DBA until I became a DBA. Then I realized all of the stuff I was missing. And that's really, being a CNC is the main reason why I became a DBA, is because you couldn't find anything about the details. How does this work? When I click this button, what's happening in the background? Why does it not do what I think it does? So I got more and more into studying how JD and the database work, learned a whole lot about it, and then all of a sudden, here I am now as as a DBA here at GSI. DBAs are paid, they're paid okay too. All right, so what other words coming out of my CNC's mouth? Now you probably thought if you're not a CNC or you don't know JD Edwards very well, you probably thought all that stuff on the architecture side was really complicated. But now when you get into the nuts and bolts of what is happening in the CNC world, you're going to hear all of these phrases being uttered at some point. And you could also hear them all in the same 10 minutes. So I'm going to go over, these are the major things that are talked about when you're deep into the CNC world. So what is an environment? So this is an example of an environment set up at one of our clients, and an older client. You can see that it's got 2018 on there. But this tries to show how all of this stuff interconnects. An environment is it's complicated. Let me break it down for you. It's a collection of pointers. An environment is a collection of pointers inside JD Edwards that indicate the location of data and where the logic is and where the logic is going to run. So basically it's asking three questions. Where's my data? What machine will process the logic? Where is the object I need to process? So normally each environment has their own dedicated database, their own logic server, and their own separate code set. They don't have to. But one of the great thing about JD is that you can create environments that share one or more of these destinations. Maybe you want 2 separate levels of testing and QA, but you don't need 2 copies of data to do that. You can create 2 environments that use their own separate code, but share the same data. And you can cut down on the amount of storage you need. So again, like I said, what machine processes the logic? Where's my data? Where's the object being processed? So let me, okay, looks like I might have this slightly out of order. So I'm going to talk about just the path code here. So this is a PY path code. Anybody says, I'm going to do in the PY environment. The very first part of an environment is the path code. And the path code is the actual object, the C object, the NER, the code that's being run. Now in this example that I have in the background is the PY and DV have their own separate code bases, but they have the same data. So in this path code that you can see kind of grayed out in the background, this is the same one we're looking at, PY and DV, when you execute code in PY and DV, it goes to the same data set. Now this bottom environment, pristine, is also just like production, okay? Production has its own path code and its own data. It's always going to be separate. It's not common for other environments to share production path code or anything in production, but sometimes you can have a separate data set that also points to production code so that you can do non-destructive testing. But the pristine is more of a sandbox, so it has its own data, like a subset of data. Now when you're talking about the data, I mentioned that you can change it up a little bit to where PY and PY and DV can have the same data, but in this one you can actually point DV and pristine to the same data. You have to have a pristine environment technically so that you know what the baseline of everything's going. So if you have a problem in development where something's not working the way you think it is on a custom object, you can go down to pristine, test that unmodified object to see if it has the same problem. So I see a lot of people will take well, not a lot, but some companies will have a pristine environment, but they won't have a whole separate set of data. They'll just let DV and PS use the same data. And you can have DV, PY, and pristine use the same data. It doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want. So that's the environment. One thing that I want to also touch on is that you can see here on the right side of the screen where it says system. In a normal installation of JD Edwards, all of your security and your data dictionary, the object librarian, where your UBE information is, the WSJ table, that's all in one database, which normally resides in production. So all of your system tables are all, and security and everything is all shared between every environment, except for pristine. Now it is possible to have a separate system for every environment, but that's out of the scope of this. This is something, if you want to talk about separating out all your system stuff between prod and non-prod, let me know. We can go through that separately. So let's go, I'm going to go back to where I'm going to talk about OCMs. OCM stands for Object Configuration Manager. This is the part in JD Edwards. Remember I said that an environment is where is the object and what machine is it on? That's what the OCM does. It's the traffic cop of JDE. It works in the context of data sources to map data locations, and it is able to point, if you're in production, the OCM says, all right, you, user Bill, you're signed into production, and for Bill signed into production trying to get an object to run, that object for that combination of things is on this logic server, and the data that you want is on this database, and the place that the logic is going to run is on this other server. So the OCM is kind of like the Windows registry. If you mess with the OCM, then you're going to break your JD Edwards system, because OCM has to exist and it has to point in the right place. The cool thing is you can point anybody, everywhere, anywhere to anything. You don't have to create a separate environment to do any testing. You could set up one user pointing to all sorts of different things and test out whatever you want. This is what OMW looks like. This is OMW, Object Management Workbench. This is where all the development, all the change management, and everything in JD Edwards happens. This is kind of a generic OMW page. And every modification is done through OMW. Back before OMW, they had separate applications you had to go into, and those all still exist, but it's all now done through here. All development is done in the context of a project. So if you want to make a modification or create a new object, it has to be in a project, and that project is used I'll talk about in the next slide is promoted via the package deployment process. OMW has some other capabilities as well, including database object modification. I usually don't recommend using OMW for table and index modification, but that's a whole other webcast. Now I did talk about packages. A package is a collection of JDE objects or projects. When you promote a project to a new environment, you can build that into a package, and that package gets built and deployed to the appropriate servers, web servers, and workstations. There's two different kinds of packages. There's a full package, which redoes everything for that environment, every bit of code. And there's an update package, which is just pick and choose the objects that you want. An update package might deploy a single project, for example. There's a lot of flexibility with package deployment. You can have multiple servers per path code. You can have different packages for different users or uses, separate business lines, different languages, and stuff like that. It's really very flexible, and it is the way that all code gets managed and sent out everywhere. And that's done by a package deployment. So package deployment is separate from package building. Once you've built a package, now you are going to say, let's deploy that to our enterprise server, or let's deploy that to our French division. And that goes out and replaces the objects that have been modified on the destination with the new objects. And there's a whole lot that goes on in the background of that, which is a subject for another webcast. But one thing a package deployment doesn't do is change menu items, UDCs, or table or index structure changes. Doesn't do any of that. And there's several other things that aren't changed by a package deployment. So you may be wondering, how do those change? Well, as soon as you promote one of those items, as soon as you promote a menu or UDC change in OMW, it automatically gets put in the destination environment as soon as you hit promote. Then everything else that you do only gets done when the package is deployed. All right, let's talk about, this is a SAR, which is software action request. A SAR is something that Oracle creates to cover some bug fix or maybe new functionality or something like that. It could have one or more JDE objects. It's usually just focused on a single thing, sometimes one or two objects. These can be based on customer requests, or they could just be internal things that are guiding internal JDE development. And these SARs are always delivered via ESU or a tools release update. You can get some one-offs, but that's a slightly difficult method of getting your system updated. Now, I mentioned ESU, which is how SARs are deployed. An ESU could have one SAR, it could have 10 SARs, it could have 1,000 SARs. So you were looking at hundreds. You're looking at hundreds or thousands of objects in some cases. There are special kinds of ESUs. An ESU might come out to fix a specific problem, but an ESU might just come out to encapsulate a whole bunch of problems that just need to be deployed. And there are special ones. You can get a one-off ESU, which Oracle will customize the objects that are in there and let you install it. There are baseline ESUs. You have to install that for anything else to work. And those are usually very, very large and change a lot of stuff. And there are also dependent ESUs. You may find an ESU that has the thing that you want in it, but you can't install that until you install a previous one that has dependent objects. And when you're searching for ESUs, you can see here, this is the Change Assistant. You have to make sure you're getting the latest ESU. You could go in and find out that there's an ESU for what you want, and then if you go look a week later, you go ahead and download that and install it. But little did you know that there was a new ESU that came out because there was some horrible bug in the previous one you downloaded. So always keep checking to make sure you haven't been superseded on your ESU. Now, installing an ESU is a development effort. It's changing objects in your system. So you need to make sure that these changes are not going to affect your business. And when you're getting an ESU that has multiple SARs in it, those SARs are not necessarily related to each other. You could download a fix for fixed assets, but they could also include a change to how GL works. And by implementing that ESU, you could change multiple things, including stuff you weren't even prepared to do. This is kind of an older term, ASUs. These are application software updates. They're still used for places like DSI. It's a prepackaged bunch of objects that are specific to one application, and it's used a lot for third parties. ASUs are not normally sent from Oracle, but you can do it, and you more often see this from third-party stuff. Now, an update, I do mention in here a little bit when I go to the next slide. An update is the older style of update, not the new one, which is a new tools release. But an update was every ESU released from day one for that particular application level. You could use it to quickly get fixed current for an upgrade and install. And there could be multiple updates throughout the life of a particular version of JD Edwards. You wouldn't want to really install an update onto your system. An update would be equivalent to an upgrade. So if you feel like you're going to do a baseline ESU or update or do a fixed current, you might as well just upgrade to the next release because it's the same amount of work. And when everything goes wrong, what do? We open an SR, service request. So you'll hear this whenever something goes wrong, they're going to say open an SR. That means go to Oracle's website, open up a service request, and eventually someday they will help you out with that. You can open this an SR up through via the phone. You can call them. You can go through their webpage at support.oracle.com, or if you have Oracle Enterprise Manager, that you can put it in through there. And Oracle Enterprise Manager is different from Server Manager, although they are working on getting Server Manager into Enterprise Manager. So sometimes you'll hear people say Enterprise Manager as it relates to databases, and they may say it as it relates to Server Manager, but it could get a little confusing, but I don't know a lot of clients that are using Enterprise Manager for Server Manager or even for service requests. All right, the next thing is the term fat client. And we all know the joke about fat clients, but fat client is essentially you have your laptop or your desktop and someone comes and installs the entire JD Edwards application on your machine. And all of the logic and stuff that is done for JD Edwards is done on your computer. Now, the more modern way of doing it, and I'll talk about it in the next one, is obviously this stuff is all centralized, more mainframe style. But for the fat clients, there still are fat clients because developers need it. It's required for upgrade tasks and other things like that. It probably isn't going to be around forever, but it still has its uses today. And they're trying to get all of the things that this can do onto the web. And some are more successful than others, but you still need to have these. And I'm actually really glad that they're kind of going away because they're a pain in the butt to maintain. And now here's what we all know and love, and how everybody uses JD Edwards for the most part is through the web client. This is the primary interface that everybody uses. This is served by the web servers. You don't have anything installed on a local machine unless you're exporting grids or whatever. This is all done in browser. All the logic is done somewhere else. The web servers do some work. You are doing some database calls and logic executions on the web server, and most of it's done on the enterprise server. All of that is handled in the background. So the great thing about having the web client is that you can access JD Edwards from anywhere, from your laptop, from your home, from a cell phone, however you have that hooked up. This lets you access it from there. And I think I've pretty much run out of all the tech speak that I can think of for today. So I'm going to stop my share and turn it back over to Brooke at this time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Bill. Thank you. That was great.